Right, welcome everybody to our live broadcast here. Just working through a new interface of GoToWebinar, but everybody, thanks for joining. Today's topic, we are going to be talking about Avalara integration and extending those capabilities into Work 365 for advanced tax capabilities. Presenters today, we are very pleased to have Michelle Tillada, who is a sales executive with Avalara. And then also joining us, we have our very own Kayla Von Bach, who is Work 365's Director of Customer Success. Just want to touch quickly on the agenda for today. So really, we're going to be covering four areas. We'll be covering introductions, background, obviously, and then we will be talking about Avalara's very important topic of why is sales tax so complex, and really focusing on some ways that Avalara can help minimize the complexity and really help day-to-day around sales compliance, sales tax compliance. Also, turn it back over to Kayla, and she's going to be showing how we connect, how we set up, configure Avalara into Work 365. And then we're going to wrap up today with some questions, next steps, and go from there. So here's your presenters, and I'm going to turn it over to Kayla here in a second, but just so everybody gets to see our smiling faces, again, Michelle Tillada and Kayla Von Bach with Work 365. Kayla, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. So a lot of people joining us today, so just want to take a step back and introduce what Work 365 is. Work 365 is a subscription management and billing automation application. We're built on Dynamic CRM and Power Platform. We do four things we like to call pillars in our application, and they include subscription management, billing automation, payments, and self-service. We are used by Microsoft CSP partners around the world, and we have worked with many Microsoft award-winning partners. Just taking a quick look at the agenda, I could see that we have a lot of people on the call from all over the world. Today, we're particularly excited to provide additional capability and around complex tax requirements for the U.S. taxes. This is through the partnership of Avalara, of course. At this time, we're only integrated with the U.S. tax calculation. However, should you need to solve for the VAT, please reach out to us and let us know it's something you'd like to have. Of course, we're always interested in hearing that feedback. So we've always had the ability to charge for taxes. However, today we're highlighting our newly launched integration with Avalara. We're excited about this partnership because it allows you, the user, to leverage Avalara to calculate, analyze, and report taxes through their industry-leading tool. This will guarantee no matter the rules and complexities, your end users will always be taxed properly, and your company will never have to worry about the missed taxes. Avalara, paired with Work 365, is a powerful tech stack, and it allows you to properly manage your subscription business while maintaining tax compliance. The process to connect Work 365 and from the end user perspective is pretty straightforward, and I'll go over that towards the end of the session. The part that you guys are looking at right now, which is the tax rates that we have defined. This is something we've always had in our application. However, these are fixed tax rates. You have to manage them. This is useful when you have simple tax calculation strategies in place, places like Canada and Europe. Taxing in the US, as we all know, is a little bit more complex because of rates, rules, and laws change. They change all the time, and keeping up with those changes is pretty difficult. So through here, you can manage your tax settings for the categories of VAT, AST, or other non-complicated tax requirements. And here in particular, we're looking at their different categories we've set up to charge taxes in taxation. It's not uncommon for customers to have one or multiple categories. It really depends on who you're selling to and what you're selling. You, as the merchant, will know based off of your product catalogs if you're selling software, hardware, professional services, etc., what categories will need to be created. So moving on to the next slide, go back to that one right there. So from this list right here, you can notice that the country of origin and different tax categories we've created based off of the services we offer from your location of the customer. It works well, and it accurately applies the percentage of tax in the line items on the invoice based off of the rules you've defined. However, As previously noted, the complicated part isn't really the math. So going on to the next slide, as we see, why is sales tax so challenging? So our current manual process works. Why integrate with Avalara? And I know Michelle's going to talk a lot around the complexities and nuances around tax rules here in the US. However, anyone who has managed tax knows how vague tax rules and application can be. Applying the percentage of the tax isn't hard. Figuring out when to charge and what rate to apply is where it gets tough, not to mention the tax rules change. And if you're not finished with your taxation process at the time of the invoice, you've also got to report those taxes at the end of the year. As the leader in their industry, partnering with Avalara was an easy decision to appendage additional value very quickly. So now I'd like to shift it and address the Avalara as a service and pass it over to Michelle so she can talk about that a bit more in depth.
Hey everyone, it's nice to be here with you today. My name is Michelle Talada. Again, I'm from Avalara. We do specialize in the sales tax piece. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our capabilities. Todd, quick point, I think you're sharing the notes piece instead of the presentation. If you might want to switch that piece. But a quick introduction on myself. I live in Pennsylvania, and I work specifically on our new business team. So I'm helping businesses evaluate Avalara's services and better understand how we might integrate with their current systems. Todd, it's still showing the notes section.
I apologize.
We could switch screens. Yeah.
Let me just do that. Sorry. And let me know if that dropped the notes out.
It's just the slides, not presentation. No, it's still the notes. That's okay. Maybe what we could do is just go back to the PowerPoint version. If we need to stay there, we can, and I can just talk through that instead of in presentation mode.
Okay, through here?
Yep, we can wing it. Okay. Want to make sure we're maximizing everybody's time today. So if you want to go ahead and flip to the iceberg slide, there was a little bit more animation in this next slide, but when most people think about sales tax compliance, they're really focused on calculating the tax rate specifically. But rates are really just the tip of the iceberg, as anyone who has had to handle anything to do with sales tax, especially in the US, knows. There's a lot of other things that go into it, which is why it can be so challenging for your business. So what I want you to think about, if you could flip to the next slide, the US alone, again, we do have capabilities throughout the world, but the integration with Work365 is specifically for the US at this point. So I'm really going to focus a little bit on why it's so complex in the US. So the sheer intricacy of the US sales tax phenomenon is that there are over 13,000 tax jurisdictions, and they can all make their own rules. So it really ensures that it can be super challenging for any organization because transactions can cross, and most transactions cross at least some boundary. In fact, if you can flip to the next slide, it's not uncommon for rates to change between neighboring buildings, even on the same street. And while varying metrics like sales tax can really paint a confusing picture from one region to the next, that's honestly just the beginning. Similar complexities exist along countless other dimensions, and details can really be quite comical. So for example, how a bagel is taxed in New York really depends on whether or not it's sliced, if you can believe that. And candy bars in Indiana are taxed differently depending on the brand or the ingredients that they might have. So sales tax in the US can be super complex. In addition to that, it's always changing, right? So there are, in 2021 alone, 123,000 tax changes. Each year, and we're about to actually have a webinar on this, kind of what's coming for 2024, but each year there are tens of thousands of changes to the rules and regulations and rates. Next slide. On a positive note, the good thing is that commerce has never been so vibrant. It is growing in a lot of different areas, but it does mean that it's also constantly changing. If COVID was something that changed the world in a number of ways, it definitely changed commerce. Our consumer behavior across all channels has shifted. Less physical stores, more to e-commerce. It's affected both online and offline transactions. Next slide. And with that, governments are reacting with really aggressive policies. So I have a few on here. I know the slides are likely going to be sent out afterwards, but a couple things that I wanted to mention. All 45 sales tax states, so all of the states that charge sales tax, including parts of Alaska, local parts of Alaska, as well as DC and Puerto Rico, have now adopted economic nexus laws, as well as marketplace laws as of just this past year. Nearly every economic region in the world, major economic region in the world, has undergone some level of indirect tax reform and changes to VAT or GST. And over 60 countries have adopted or plan to implement e-invoicing laws. So even states in the US, like Massachusetts, are already piloting having e-invoicing in the US. So what does that mean to you? It means that everything is a lot more digitized. So if you'll flip to the next one, Todd. COVID really accelerated the adoption of virtual audits by states. So less travel time means auditors are able to do more virtual audits, which means businesses can't really rely on paper responses to audits anymore. And they really do have to be prepared to file things electronically. As I mentioned, over 60 countries have announced or are already requiring that e-invoicing legislation. So all of this, the digitization, the changes to the way that we're doing business, the way that consumers are buying, means that it's more of a burden than it ever has been before. And to be quite frank, most businesses really aren't prepared for it. So they're having to react. I'm sure you are having to react with automating, integrating, moving to the cloud, all of those different types of things. Next slide. And in order to do that, it really requires a lot of resources. So you could throw people at it, but no matter how sophisticated a company's in-house compliance team is, they themselves are an expense, and they're really stretched thin because they're having to manage a lot of different business systems. And because this topic is changing all the time and is becoming far more complex, we're finding that even in the best cases, intelligence around sales and use tax has been a bit in short supply, and visibility to the records that you need in order to be compliant is challenging. A lot of businesses are throwing, additional money at investments in, technology upgrades, automation. But the reality is it is an investment. It's not cheap to get compliant and to get these systems in place. Next slide. But the reality of that is that it's far more expensive to not adopt, to kind of bury your head in the sand. 40% of most states' revenue actually comes from sales tax. Just knowing that alone should tell you something. The states are going to be aggressive because a lot of their revenue, especially in any kind of challenging economy, means that they need that revenue. And the average cost of an audit is over $300,000 when it comes to sales tax. Most companies, like I said, they're already putting people in place and resources in place. If they're not automating, they're probably already spending between $11,000 and $17,000 a month, and not always getting it right, still leaving themselves open for risk. So how do we help? Next slide. There are 5 main steps to tackling sales tax compliance: understanding where you need to be registered, and getting registered there, getting that tax collection right, the calculation right, managing your exempt sales, and then getting it back to those government entities. And Avalara has an entire suite of services that can help with all of those different areas. And And how do we do that? We do that through our APIs. So with our best-in-class APIs, we've built connections to all of the systems that you might be working with. And Work365 is one of our newest connections. So this really kind of gives you high level the way that the Avalara suite works. We are built in the cloud. Our tax researchers are doing all of the research on all of those policies that I said are changing and complex and all of that. We're maintaining that in the cloud on the back end. We can give you access to those tax researchers and those tax research. But the main thing is for the automation piece is we're connecting with your system. So whatever they might be, in this case, Work365, but we also connect with your ERP systems, your other e-commerce sites, POS, whatever it might be, through that API connection, so that you don't have to be the expert on the tax piece. All of that can stay on our side. Once you get it set up, I'd like to say set it and forget it, but mostly all of that information is going to be flowing over to us. We're going to make the tax calculation and we're going to send it back to you. We'll be as out of the way as possible. Again, it's all happening via your systems. We can even pull in those exemption certificates on the exempt sales side and give you tools to manage those exemption certificates. So that's part of the tax calculation. And then all of that information can flow over into the returns section should you decide to turn that on, so that we can take that off your plate as well and handle all of that returns processing for you. So the goal is really to automate as much as possible. But again, any of these pieces are options and can be kind of an a la carte solution for you. So I want to turn it back over to Kayla, because I think, Kayla, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to be jumping in and actually showing how that tax determination works. Again, the key is really that it's quick, it's easy. You don't have to maintain any tax tables. It is live, it is accurate. It happens in under a second.
Right. Yeah. You definitely don't have to be a user of Work365 to appreciate how simple it is to connect the integration. And, as Michelle states, you get access to all of these great tax logic calculations from Avalara's end. And you can manage and file your taxes directly through them, and they're going to keep you up to date. There's no reason to kind of go in here and just manage your tax codes. That's all, again, through the automation managed through the Avalara piece. So the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to visit your integrations. This is in your admin hub, so you'll see your integrations tab there. You'll scroll down, you'll find the Avalara connector, and you'll just hit create to create a new connection. And then you go to the next slide. I can show you what that looks like. And then from here, you want to follow the documentation instructions, of course, that we'll provide you, but you'll fill out some information related to your Avalara account, your company information, hit save, and your connection is successful. I'll move on to the next slide. And then you can set your tax categories here. Again, if there's any other confusion around what codes you should be setting up here, the default code that you're showing right there, that D whatever, that's a code that Avalara uses directly to apply the tax logic based off of the customer's address, where they're located, and what service you're using, right? So what service are you selling? So once we have this piece defined, if we go on to the next slide, we'll be able to see our products. So E3, very common CSP product that we're probably all selling. We can define the category that's applied to the product, and all subscriptions related to the product will be subject to this tax logic. Now the magic begins once we apply the tax rules to a specific customer. So if we go on to the next slide. So address validation, also called AVS, for those of you who are familiar with that, is available through the Work365 dropdown. And you can actually ensure the address is in the proper format, it's real, and it's ready to be sent to Avalara before the tax logic is applied, so you can determine that that is good to go. For anybody who has been handling this, you know that you'd want to verify that before sending that to Avalara, and that you have the right address, because humans are human. Humans are going to make errors, and we just want to make sure that that's accurate. Once the address is verified.
Kayla, can I jump in for 1 second? I think it's really important. Part of the Avalara tax calculation is that validation. And the reason why that's so important is because we're actually transposing that to longitude, latitude on the back end, so that we can be pinpoint accurate on those tax rates. so that we can guarantee our tax calculation. So that is one of the things that is a differentiator with this partnership and Avalara, is you are getting an accuracy guarantee on your rates.
Right, which is to your point, Michelle, why you say that rates can change from buildings across the street, right? So we have to get pinpoint accuracy to determine that logic. So this part, like I said, is very important. So once we have that part defined, the last thing you'll want to do is to make sure that the AvaTax module is selected in the tax service. And once that's set up, you're done configuring your tax. You've got your configuration, your setup, your rules, and you're now applying taxes. So that's really all there is to it. Once you set up the configuration, again, it's just defining those codes, applying it to the proper products, verifying the address, and then making sure the tax service is selected in the contract. So it's pretty easy to add, and again, a lot less maintenance from the user perspective in terms of making sure that all of those tax codes are up to date. All right, and so that's as simple as it is as far as setting it up. I wanted to make sure that we left enough time here to answer any questions that we might have from the audience. I know we've got a healthy mixture of participants from Avalara, from Work365, all across the world. So if you have any questions, now would be a good time to drop them in. And if you have any interest in either of these, you can feel free to contact sales@work365apps.com to get in contact with our sales team. You can follow up with Michelle if you're interested in the Avalara portion. We'll follow up with some additional information and context after the presentation.
All right, put out a call for any questions.
We have one question. What's the pricing structure for the add-in? If you're asking if there's an additional cost for the Avalara integration on Work365, we'll just have to make sure that you're on the right plan. Yeah, that was okay. Thanks for confirming that was your question. So yeah, we just need to make sure you're on the right plan. There's no additional cost for this service.
There is on the Avalara side.
From a Work365 perspective, yes, I want to clarify that.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the way that we do pricing on the Avalara side, so you would need to have a contract, an agreement on the Avalara side. Work365 is maintaining that connection, so that API connection that they built, they'll maintain that, but on the Avalara side, you would need to have an agreement in place. The way that it does work from a pricing perspective, it is based on the number of committed transactions that you have in Nexus states. So obviously, if you don't have Nexus or an obligation in a state, you're not registered there, then there's no tax calculation being done because you have no obligation. But if you are registered in that state and a tax calculation does need to be done, then in that case, that would count. We are looking at committed transactions. So those finalized transactions. Knowing your Nexus and understanding where you should be registered is super important. And we can definitely help with that if that's something that you need help with. As laws have changed in the last 5 years quite significantly regarding what triggers Nexus. So if you haven't looked at that in a while, I would definitely recommend looking at that to ensure. But yes, there would be a cost associated. And then each of those different pieces that I showed you, if you do want functionality around exempt sales and exemption certificates, returns filing, direct access to that tax research portion, all of those have their own fees associated with it. It's really just depending on, which pieces are going to be a good fit for you. We can design a package.
And we do have another question
for a lot of people
around products. So the question is, are products still mapped to tax codes by the customer?
Yes, so, you will need to map the tax codes from Work365 because only you know what you're selling. There's no not automated affix rule. We can definitely help, and obviously Avalara's team will be able to deduce what specific code you need to use. And I can tell you, working with Avalara for quite some time in a previous job, chances are you're going to be following all like the same code for a lot of the services you have. There are a ton of code services. A lot of those, obviously Avalara services many different entities, not just digital service goods or SaaS softwares or however you want to look at it. But yeah, you'll need to define that, but we can definitely help you from both ends to decide what that is.
So just to add in a little bit of clarity, Avalara has our own proprietary tax codes. And basically, we're maintaining all of the logic for that behind the scenes. So if anything is changing, you just map those tax codes out at the beginning when you're getting it set up so that each tax code lets us know what it is that you're selling. And then we're maintaining all the logic on the back end. So again, to my point, if something changes, a law changes, a tax rate changes, you do not need to be the expert. You do not even, maybe you might not even be aware of it. It's going to change on our side, which will then give you the correct tax back. So you map those tax codes at the beginning, and then you don't have to worry about it afterwards. I did see a question in there, is sales tax for Microsoft licensing really that complex? And yes, it can be. So a lot of people think that services and software are exempt. That is actually not the case in all jurisdictions. So software as a service, for example, is fully taxable in the state of Washington, exempt in several other states. It is taxable in several states, but as example, Washington is taxable, and in Texas, it's actually taxed at a reduced rate. So it can be definitely complex. And services, by the way, are included in those nexus thresholds in most states. Most states do include services in your nexus thresholds, triggering those obligations to register and collect. So it can be more complex, especially in the last few years.
All right, let's see. Other questions? So somebody feels like they're doing things wrong. Does it open up a can of worms? We hear about penalties and out of compliance things. Is there kind of, I guess if I'm kind of paraphrasing this question a little bit, do you get companies that kind of come to you thinking maybe they did something, be in trouble? Where do you start in a situation like that?
So really good question. Everything starts with Nexus. It all hinges on where you have an obligation. And I can't say it enough. So many things have changed in the last few years. So if you think you might be out of compliance or you just haven't looked at it, it's really worth having a conversation. And where we generally start is just giving you a little bit of feedback based on a quick snapshot of at least your last year of, whether or not there are red flags. We can help with doing a full Nexus study, or even, like I said, a high level one. So one thing to note, I'll throw it out there. If you're not sure, connect with me or connect with somebody at Work365 and they can get you to me. We are offering a free 1-year look back, a 1-year Nexus study risk assessment through our partnership with Work365. It's only available this month for the rest of this month. But if you're interested in taking advantage of it, you can take advantage of it, sign up for it. You do have a year to complete it, and it'll give you some really solid feedback on where you should be registered and what might have triggered in the last year. And that'll at least give you definite, information to shore up your Nexus and where you should be registered.
Perfect. Appreciate that. Do we want to go over how to contact folks and what's kind of the protocol for situational things, who to reach out to, so everybody's clear on that process?
So Work365 users, contact your dedicated CSM. Everybody will have one. Ask them how they can take advantage of the Avalara add-on. We're more than happy to get you in contact with Michelle and her team if you are not a user of Avalara. And then from the side of non-Work365 users, you can contact sales at work365apps.com. There's also some additional information on our website if you want to contact them directly. There's a couple of different ways you can do that, but email us directly. We'll respond very quickly.
Perfect. And last call for any other questions.
We did have one more question.
We do have another one. So, okay, let's open that up. If I can navigate, I don't see it. Oh. Do you guys see it? I'm not seeing it.
Does it matter what our accounting system is?
Oh.
So, I mean, it's a good question. You know, as Michelle pointed out, Avalara obviously connects into a lot of different places, but the center of truth here is going to be Work 365 for billing information. So a lot of times we recommend the billing piece to connect to your accounting system, because again, we're the system of truth when it comes to subscription management, who's going to be billed for what, etc. So it doesn't matter what accounting system you're using. If you plug into Avalara, at Work 365, we'll talk to Avalara directly, and then Work 365 will relate the tax information to your accounting system through whatever means of integration that we have for you.
And I can add on to that, as a best practice, anywhere you're really doing billing is where you should connect with Avalara. So if it's any kind of billing system that you might do, whether it's a POS, or quoting system, that's why we do also connect to CRMs, as well as e-commerce sites where you might be doing at least the initial quote and collection of payment, and then you're actually finalizing the invoice in your ERP. All of those different pieces we can connect to, and that's what we would recommend, so that you have one single source of truth for across all channels. And that also provides a lot of transparency for your clients as well, so that they're seeing that that tax rate on that total tax, not only on their quote, but also on their finalized invoice.
All right. Thank you for that, Michelle. So now the real final call for any last questions, thoughts, or even comments that you might have. Otherwise, we will wrap up today's session a bit early, but I think we handled some great content, some great questions. So Michelle, as always, thank you so much for jumping in and providing your expertise. I think one of the things that really jumped out is it's great technology. It's smart people, but it's really being that business advisor, knowing the complexity, the enormous complexity, and having that business partner, business advisor walk alongside you is just a tremendous advantage. And obviously, when you're talking billing and billing automation, subscription management, working with Work 365 is also a strategic advantage. So wanted to say thank you to both our presenters today. And if there's no other questions, I am going to shut down the session for today. I have recorded this, so you can reach out to those aliases if you do want a recording, or otherwise just get in contact directly. But thank you everyone for attending, and everybody have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.